Welcome to Book Tales, where stories come to life. A few moments of love and the deep walls of pride. A few days had passed since the grand ball at Meryton, but the effects of that night still lingered. A silent yet undeniable attraction had begun to blossom between Mr. Bingley and Jane Bennet. Mr. Bingley's cheerful nature and Jane's gentle demeanor had quickly drawn them closer to each other. But on the other hand, another story was being written between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, though it was not a story of love but of resentment. Elizabeth's dislike for Mr. Darcy had taken deep root. She saw him as an arrogant, insensitive, and self-absorbed man who had no regard for the feelings of others. Mr. Darcy, who outwardly appeared reserved and indifferent, was struggling within himself. He questioned, why? Why do I keep thinking about Elizabeth? But his pride held him captive. One day, Mrs. Bingley invited Jane Bennet to Netherfield Hall for tea. Mrs. Bennet saw an opportunity. Daughter, the weather looks rather grim. You should go on horseback so that if it rains, you'll be stranded. And then you'll have no choice but to stay at Netherfield. Jane, who always assumed the best in people, ignored this scheme and left with a smile. But fate truly fulfilled Mrs. Bennet's wish. The rain became severe. By the time Jane reached Netherfield, she was drenched. By nightfall, she was burning with fever. At Netherfield, her condition worsened, and the Bingley family insisted that she stay until she fully recovered. When the news reached Longbourn, Elizabeth became restless. I cannot leave my sister sick and alone. And so, she set out on foot, walking 3 miles through muddy roads, drenched in rain, just to reach Jane. When Elizabeth arrived at Netherfield, everyone was taken aback. Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley looked at her muddy shoes and drenched clothes with disdain. Mr. Bingley, ever kind and welcoming, greeted her warmly. But Mr. Darcy, he simply watched her in silence. That was the moment something shifted. The girl he had considered ordinary had braved the storm for her sister. Mr. Darcy observed Elizabeth's face, the damp strands of hair clinging to her cheeks, the raindrops glistening on her flushed skin, and the unusual spark in her eyes. That was the moment when a battle began between his heart and his mind. What is this? Why do I feel this way? Yet, Darcy reassured himself, it was mere physical attraction, nothing more. During Elizabeth's stay at Netherfield, Miss Bingley started sensing something unusual. Having set her own sights on Mr. Darcy, she soon realized that his attention was repeatedly drawn to Elizabeth. No, this cannot be. Miss Bingley did everything in her power to belittle Elizabeth, criticizing her clothes, her family, her manner of speaking. But Elizabeth, skilled in handling sarcasm, only smiled in return. However, upon returning to Meryton, something unexpected happened. There, Elizabeth met a new gentleman, Mr. Wickham, handsome, charming, eloquent, with eyes that seemed to sparkle as he spoke. At first glance, Elizabeth found him to be an honest and remarkable man. And then, Mr. Wickham shared a story that deepened Elizabeth's resentment toward Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy wronged my father, robbed me of what was rightfully mine. That was all Elizabeth needed to hear. Her dislike for Darcy solidified further. I was right all along. Mr. Darcy truly is a cruel and self-centered man. The game had now grown more complicated. Love was blooming between Jane and Mr. Bingley. Mr. Darcy, despite trying to resist, was falling under Elizabeth's spell. Elizabeth, who might have begun to understand Darcy, had her hatred reinforced by Wickham's story. A storm was brewing, and the tale of love, pride, and misunderstandings had only just begun. If you like video, hit like button or subscribe our channel for more interesting stories.